We live in a world with much confusion, propaganda, and outright lies. It's hard to know what's real, what's false, and what's really going on. Do you have even one source that you can trust? And I mean really trust. Can you imagine leading a state or an army or a nation in this environment? What if you heard from God every day about your life, your purpose, and your future, and you understood with clarity what to do? Imagine hearing so clearly that he even trusted you with intelligence to advise leaders desperate for answers. Hi, I'm John Redenbow, and I have the honor of leading the Spiritual Intelligence Mentorship, an in-depth program where a team of people work with you in a highly structured atmosphere to teach you how to decode the encrypted language of God through dreams. If you're up for the challenge, I invite you to apply today. Register at spiritualintel.com. Hello. Welcome to Dream Life Decoded. So super excited to have an interview with a good friend and just an amazing woman. Today we get to have Rachel Hamm on the show with us. And just a little background, when I first got started doing YouTube and really didn't know anything about doing YouTube and had some people that really helped get me started early on, a friend of mine introduced me to Rachel, and I was just blown away by the dreams that she has, by the discernment, the prophecy, how it operates not only in her life, but in her family's life. And Rachel is a mover and a shaker. Like, she is doing some things. She is currently running for Secretary of State of the state of California. She's a mom of 4 amazing kids and a wife, and she's an author and a speaker. And man, she just has so much going on. So let's bring her on and get started.
Hi.
Hey, Rachel. How are you?
I am good. I'm so glad to be with you. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. Gosh, ever since the first time we got hooked up and we started, I think I had a phone conversation with you and we started talking about dreams, and then obviously super excited to hear your interest in dreams and some of the stuff that you've done. And then, you know, how that equates even into the family environment that you have. And we talked dreams, and then we did a couple of things together. And it wasn't like the first live dream interpretation that was like an extended period of time that I did. I think we did on your show.
Yes. And it's still one of the shows I hear from people the most about. Really? People loved that show, and your interpretation of their dreams have had long-term impact on them.
Oh, praise God. You know, I'm still hearing from people that are like, I saw you on the Rachel Hamm show. And so it's funny. I know. It's like, I was looking for your email earlier today in my inbox, and I typed in Rachel Hamm, and there's like 50 or 75 emails with your name in it that are like, hey, I saw you on Rachel Hamm, and hey, you did this. And hey, you know, it's just like, it's so fun. So yeah, back in the day, gosh, that was almost a year ago. That was like, what, March of last year, I think.
Wow. When
we first met, started talking, and then of course I got to meet you in person at a couple of events and hear you speak. And gosh, it's been great. We haven't done enough stuff together. I feel like we should be doing more stuff together, but it's so good. I know you're just swamped with the campaign, and gosh, since the time I met you and where your life is now, like, it's just a whole different world for you. Tell us about that journey, how you ended up getting involved in running for Secretary of State and politics, and were there any dreams involved in that? Or
oh yeah, there were a lot of dreams about it, but I was taking them all metaphorically because I couldn't fathom that God was actually asking me to literally go into politics. So I kept having dreams about President Trump and General Flynn would both, in my dreams, come to me and ask me to step up and help run California or help govern California. I had dreams of being fitted for a suit. And I said, like, what suit am I being fitted for? And they said, because you're going to govern California, you need a new suit, you know. And then I had dreams about it being inauguration day and me walking out and like security people coming beside me and me being escorted to the podium and me realizing it was me that was being inaugurated. And then I had dreams of President Trump and Melania coming to me and asking me if they could meet with me because they wanted to go over some plans for the state of California. I just had so many. And then General Flynn too. I had one dream that I remember really specifically was of General Flynn wearing a doctor's coat. And, yeah. And I just remember talking to him, and we were talking about the country and what was happening. And I was telling him how sorry I was about what had happened to him and that the injustice that he experienced. And he was saying, it's okay because now I have this doctor's jacket. And I took that to mean that the Lord was using him to bring healing to our nation. And that even that was like a sense of bringing justice to the scales for him, that all that had happened to him was now being used for good, you know? And it was part of what was his passion and what was driving him was how bad that situation was for him. I think it was a fuel that was put onto a fire within him to motivate him to do all that he's done over these last couple of years. So
that's amazing. Yeah,
lots of dreams, definitely about politics, about running. I could go on. I mean, I literally have had like 50 dreams about.
Did you have any one dream that really tipped the scales for you where you said, okay, it's not metaphorical. God's not speaking figuratively. It's not just about supporting the cause in the state of California. Yeah. I need to run. Do you know when that point was for you?
I think it was the dream where I had walked into a room and President Trump and Melania were standing there and they said, it's so good to see you. We've been watching everything you've been doing and we are so grateful. Thank you. And we know that you've been praying. Thank you. And we have some time on June 2nd, and we would like to meet with you to discuss governing California. And I said, well, but you don't mean being the governor. You mean something else? And they said, come on June 2nd and we'll discuss your role in governing California. Wow. And then in that dream, someone then took me from there over to be fitted for a suit. And it was, you're going to need a suit because that's what's appropriate attire for someone who governs California. And I'm like, wait, am I literally going to literally govern California? And they were like, yes. I was like, yes. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then interesting, you know how dreams are. So I get fitted for the suit and they're going to then make the suit for me. And I leave and I'm flying in the dream, flying over all these trees and like observing the state of California from the air and kind of assessing the situation and assessing what needed to be done. And I think just prophetically kind of overseeing the state. And then I woke up. And at that point, we were doing the recall. So there was, you know, literally a chance to literally be governor. And so for like 20 minutes, I thought, is God asking me to run for governor? And I was like, I'm so unqualified to do that. I mean, just really, really unqualified to do that. And that can't be, is that it? You know? And so I did pray about what was that? I wasn't sure at first. I definitely wasn't thinking Secretary of State at first, but then I did have a dream specifically about Secretary of State. And then I also, I had an open vision, which I don't really have. I have mostly dreams. You know, I'm like you, very much a prophetic dreamer. God speaks to me mainly through my dreams. But one night I couldn't sleep right in the same time. Like I think it was like the next day after that dream about Trump. And I have an open vision of a nighttime sky. And there's kind of like a clearing and like the clouds are around it. And then like you can kind of see through that to the black sky and there's stars. And then I see a door come into that opening and then it lifts up and then it turns towards me and then it opens. And I knew that God was showing me a door had just been opened to me in the heavenlies. And so I said, well, Lord, whatever the door is that you're opening to me, I will go through it. I will walk through it, but I don't know what it is. So then the next morning at 9 a.m., I was actually watching Robin D. Bullock. Do you know who that is? Mm-hmm. I was watching his live 11th hour show, and it was only like the second time I'd watched him. Mm-hmm. And this was, like a year ago. So I'm watching the show, and he says, there's someone watching right now who has just had a door open to them in the heavenlies.
Wow.
And I like gasped. I mean, it was like, I knew it was me. And I like leaned in and I'm watching him. And he said, "This is what the Lord is saying to you, secretary." And I was like, what? I actually thought in that moment, maybe God is calling me to be someone's secretary. Like, I mean, we're doing the best we can, but sometimes I can be like,
we need some admin help over here, Come
yeah, exactly. And then I thought, who's secretary, man? I'm also like not really, that doesn't seem like a good match to me for me, but I was like, okay, maybe. So then I was talking to someone who was in this Telegram channel about how to fix California. And they said, someone needs to run for Secretary of State. We don't have anyone good to run for Secretary of State in such an important position. And I knew in that moment that was what I was being asked to do.
Wow. That's amazing.
And then with the 2020 election, I mean, a lot of people didn't even know what Secretary of State did before the election, but now it's like everyone knows that the left has really been strategic about targeting the Secretary of State position in every state, because they know that if you own the Secretary of State position, you own all the positions. You can manipulate votes. You can determine who is the governor. You can determine who is on the school board. I mean, if you're corrupt, like which clearly they are. So I think there's a lot of manipulation going on in the Secretary of State's office all over the country. And it's a really, really important position if we're going to have honest elections. And I don't think we have a free republic if we don't have honest elections. So yeah, it's important.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, does Robin know that? Have you shared that with Robin Bullock?
I don't know him personally. I have talked about it on shows and stuff, but I've never met him.
Yeah. I don't know him personally either, but I know some people that are involved in his ministry. It might be interesting for him to know that. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. He's actually 3 different times said something live that was for me. He even said my name one time. He just said, Rachel, Ryan, which is my brother. And my brother and I had just had an argument. And he said, Rachel, Ryan, be free. Stop it. Be free. And I was like, it just kind of jolted me where I knew this is ridiculous. This is my brother. I need to be free from offense, get over it, move on. And so that was very interesting too. So
nothing like the family garbage out there in the public air, right?
Yeah.
I better
lucky no one else watching you.
Yeah, it's like, holy cow. Yes, Lord. Yeah. I'll call my brother. That's crazy. Wow. Yeah. I love that you live such a prophetic lifestyle, and even your kids are dreamers and seers. And man, I just really love that. I've had a couple of kids recently, 12-year-olds that joined us for live dream interpretation. And, they had stories of a dragon and, just really cool stuff. One kid, it was really interesting because it was something about, ruling or whatever. And he goes, well, what should I do? And I said, you need to run for president. That's what I told him. And I didn't crack a smile at all. And he's like, oh, really? And I'm like, I think you need to pray about that and see. But, I was feeling, in a serious thing that this guy may have a career he's 12, but he may have a career in politics at some point.
Wow.
And there was another one that they had a dream. There was another person that had a dream about their son. And I think their son was a special needs person in a wheelchair. And it was about meeting Trump. And there was something about the love that I think Trump was being attacked, and he wheeled his wheelchair out onto the platform next to him. And it was something about there was just love that he was actually going to meet Trump in the interpretation, and people were going to see it. And the love that he had for the president and the president had for this little boy was literally going to just break the heart of the nation. And people were just going to be it was just going to melt people. It was going to be incredible. And, so I started challenging his parents to begin praying really big and powerful prayers on a national scale of what their son would do. And of course, if you have I don't know what it's like. I can't imagine. But if you have a child that's really severely disabled and is in a wheelchair and has to be fed and bathed and everything, you know, you're just, a lot of times I think you're just thinking about survival or just about getting through the day. You're not thinking about the national or global impact that my kid is going to have and what their destiny is, you know. And I think it just really kind of, I could see the eyes of his parents as I was kind of doing this dream interpretation. They were just like, what? And I was just like, man, we think it's such a base level. So much of the time we don't think that, what if we're the ones God is calling to turn the state around or turn this country around? And I'm so glad you answered the call. I'm so glad you're running. As you know, I lived in California for like 13 years, everything from Chula Vista and San Diego and Oceanside and LA, Marina Del Rey, up to Oakland and Alameda, Bay Area, and a couple of years in Redding. So literally all up and down the whole state. And I love California, especially the weather in California. And my son's a surfer. But man, it's just so difficult to live under the tyranny of ridiculous leftist policies. And it's not even, to me, it's not even a Republican versus Democrat. It's corruption and good, or good versus evil and corruption. And we see it in both parties, and we see it in long-term people that have been in office. We see it all over Congress on both sides of the aisle. And man, I just declare that it is a new day in the state of California, and it is a new day in our country, and that God is calling people that may have never run, citizen politicians, which the founding fathers wanted. They're going to run for office, and they're going to bring common sense and change, and they're going to take care of our children, and they're going to make sure that we're not teaching them garbage, and that the evil powers that be are not going to get our children, and they're not going to get our elections anymore. And I believe we're going to turn this whole thing around. It's going to take, I think it's going to take some fight for that to happen. But it does my heart good to know people like yourself that we know hear from God on a very, very serious level are answering the call and running. And I would just love to see what it's going to be like when we got a bunch of Rachel Hamms in charge of this whole thing.
Yes. Oh, thank you. You know, California is a perfect example of what leftist policies give you, because as you said, you love California. It's a beautiful state. The natural resources here are amazing. I mean, there's no other state like California. It's such a special place. And yet if you drive up and down the state right now, it's a disaster. I mean, there's literal garbage everywhere. LA County, especially downtown LA, looks like a third world country. Homeless everywhere, garbage everywhere. People passed out in the gutters from just drugs being so rampant. The border crisis, San Francisco and LA both being under vaccine passport, mandatory, have to show your papers to get in anywhere and all this stuff. They're ruining our state. And I don't think that we have honestly elected anyone here since 2010, as I've looked into the elections and met with people who are heavily involved and have been for decades looking into what is going on with the elections and, figuring out really the web that they have around elections. There's like 1,000 different ways that they cheat, so that there's no one way you can just pin them on and pin them down and get it solved, because it's all these, we call it 1,000 cuts, it's 1,000 cuts in the elections. So I think that we are not even actually electing these people who are making these terrible decisions, and then they're driving the state into the ground. And it's sad. It's hard to watch. Makes me mad. Yeah. And I want to fix it.
Well, I love that.
And to be honest, I asked God to let me leave California, and
Really?
He said no.
Where were you going to go?
I love Nashville. That'd be my number one choice. But I like Texas too. I was open. I just didn't want to be here anymore, and was tired of the oppression that is in the air. And the depression, which I know is kind of happening everywhere, but I do feel like certain places are worse. And I think it's worse in California than it is, because as I've traveled all over the country, it's a great relief. When I get out of California into some other place, I can feel the shift and the relief of the oppression in the air. And, you know, but if everyone leaves, which they kind of are, I mean, it's like record numbers of people leaving the state.
You can't get a U-Haul in California anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I hear about someone else moving like every day, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if everyone good leaves, then we just concede the state to the people who got us here, you know? And so I don't want to do that either. But really, bottom line is, it doesn't really matter what I want. It doesn't really matter what matters is, what is God asking you to do? And are you being obedient and faithful with that? That's what matters. And I really, really want to get before God when I am out of this world. And I want him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. And I actually had like a fear for a long time of standing before him and him saying, I had so much more for you.
Oh.
And that was so motivating to me, because I thought, that cannot happen to me. I want to get before him and him just say, wow, well done. So I think sometimes, we make comfort a God. We make our own desires idols, and we think that we have to want to do something. That's why I very openly talk about how I didn't want to run for Secretary of State. I only do that to inspire people to think in terms of not just what you want. Like, it's not about just what you want. Like, it's
not about you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, you know, we need to turn California red like Virginia is.
Yes, absolutely.
And I actually believe that California may already be red. It's just they don't want us to know.
I think it is.
There's so many people that I meet down there, and even people that may not think exactly the same way politically that I do. They know it's a mess, and they know the people in charge are running it into the ground, and they know it's intentional. Mm-hmm. You know, so the politics thing has just become, you know, plus the propaganda censorship thing has just become the front of a new war that we're in. And it's what I call the spiritual war for America. It's a battle of spiritual ideologies. And we see what happens when you have somebody in charge that is aligned with the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Then your state looks like downtown LA. And downtown LA should be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And it is horrendous. It's just, I hate to even go. I remember taking some friends out there. My sister had never been to California. And so we drove a year or two back, and we drove out there, and I took her to downtown. And then of course we went through the, whatever it is, 20 or 40 square blocks of downtown that is Skid Row, you know, and everybody's heard of Skid Row, but you think it's like, you know, one street like a block or two long. And when you drive through block after block after block, blocks of garbage and tarps and boxes, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is the size of our whole entire downtown back in Toledo, Ohio. The squalor is just intense. Like, what is being done? And man, I'm telling you, it's people people that are blinded by darkness, that live in spiritual darkness. They're in this place where they believe lies, and we pretend things. We pretend that the hype is, we pretend that we have things like good leadership, and we pretend like elections have been fair, and we pretend like there's no corruption, and we pretend like a paper mask is going to do anything for you. Mm-hmm. And I just wish America would stop pretending. I wish we'd actually look at science and statistics. And, you know, my background is nuclear physics. So, you know, there's gotta be a time where you just shelve all the political BS and you say, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Let's actually look at what works, and what we're doing in certain places is not working. You look at New York, LA, and Chicago, you know, the greatest bastions of the leftist ideologies in America. And they are, if they were part of a national, they had a national status, they'd be on the failed nations list for the UN, like completely. Yeah. It's ridiculous. So true. We're pretending like it's just, well, you know, we believe this, and no, it's not. These people are tyrannical people who are running cities into the ground. They're doing it intentionally. If they're not doing it intentionally, they are so far inept in any form of governance that they need to be categorically removed from office and banned from ever running again. Mm-hmm. Not by law, but just by the electorate that says, you guys have had your shot, and anybody that thinks like you is not going to run our towns because we actually have to live here. You know?
Yeah. I think it's very much intentional. I don't think it's I don't know that anyone could be that inept. I think they are very intelligent people that are doing very evil things.
Yeah.
But so one of the dreams I wanted to share was, I think, about California, but I want to hear your take. It was actually my husband's dream, but it's like I have this weird thing. I don't know if you have this because of being a dream interpreter. When people tell me their dreams, I literally can see it. Like fully, I feel like I had the dream. And sometimes I remember my husband's dreams more than he does. And I get them like locked in my brain. It's really weird. Like this thing I have with dreams. So, because I was saying, the other day, I'm like, I remember the dream, and I'm talking about, he's like, how do you always remember my dreams like that? I'm like, I don't know. When you're saying it, it's almost like I'm having the dream. I can see it in my mind. It plays like a movie, and then it just gets locked in there. So this was a really cool dream, I thought. So my husband and our son Ezekiel were standing on this big grassy knoll, and the property they were on was surrounded by a big green hedge all the way around the edge of the property. And my husband was going to teach my son how to shoot a bow and arrow. So he put his hand over both of his, like Ezekiel's hands were on the bow, and then my husband put his hands on top of Ezekiel's hands and was helping him, So he said, okay, you pull it back like this, and then you let go. And when he let go, the whole contraption went flying, not just the bow, not just the arrow, the bow and arrow both flew together, and it went all the way over the hedge and it went straight down. And what flew up then was a bear that bow had shot straight in the head, right in the very center of his head, and it split the bear in half. So he sees the bow and arrow go over the hedge, and then up in the air flies this bear with an arrow stuck in the center of his head, and then he sees the bear split into two pieces and fall to the ground. And he was like, whoa, that's crazy that we would hit it so precisely in the center of its head without even knowing it was there. Like, they couldn't even see it with the hedge. Like, didn't even know, just shot, and that's where it happened to go. So what do you think of that? That's it.
That's a crazy dream. That is incredible. There's so much there, from the idea that it starts out with your son, and his name is Ezekiel. And you're talking about a hedge. And of course, I had prophesied over me at 16, the call of Ezekiel, and it's the watchman on the wall. And it's go and tell them what I tell you. And if you don't tell them and they die in their sin, it's on your head. That's literally what God says. It's on your head, right? But if you do tell them and they don't repent and they die, it's on their own head. So that's the call of Ezekiel, where he's talking about it's on your head or it's on their head. And I also think it's really interesting that your son, and what's your husband's name again?
Marshall.
Yeah. I've met Marshall. Yeah. I met Marshall. Yeah. And so Marshall, that's so funny. I'm reading a book right now on the faith of an American president, and it's about Dwight D. Eisenhower and his Christianity. And of course, they're talking about Marshall, who was the chief of staff of the Army, back in the day, under Truman and Roosevelt and World War II and all of that, the Marshall Plan and all these things. But it's about marshaling, is the idea of to marshal or to rally the forces. When I thought, so it's a younger generation and an older generation working together to do what they think is going to teach. I think of the Psalm, blessed be the Lord my strength, who teaches my hands to war and my fingers to battle. And so that's what Marshall is doing with Ezekiel, is he's teaching him how to war, how to pull back the bow and arrow. Well, they're thinking they're going to shoot an arrow, and what happens is the entire contraption goes flying out of their hands.
Yeah. What do you think that is?
Well, this may get a little dicey, but the first thing I thought was the situation with Ukraine, the bear being Russia. And if you're sending the bow and arrow over the hedge, over the place of safety that they're in, to another place that's outside of the hedge of protection, you're really not just sending the arrow, you're sending the weapons of war, the ability to do war, over to someone else. And that arrow ends up firmly planted in the head of the bear, and then the bear splits. And so that's what I thought of. I think it might have to do with, well, there's a whole lot going on overseas right now that we're,
Yeah.
the quote mainstream media. By the way, the mainstream media is Joe Rogan.
I know. Isn't that encouraging to see those numbers?
I'm like, yeah, Joe, mainstream media is now podcasters. Awesome. Highest rating, right?
I know. I loved that.
But the idea that what people consider the traditional news is still on their ridiculous leftist propaganda, pandemic whole spiel about promoting fear and garbage and censorship and lies to the American people. I don't even know if there's anybody that even listens to them anymore. Clearly by the ratings, not many. But there's a lot that if you're not paying attention and you don't have connections overseas, you probably don't know is happening. And one of the things is this Russia-Ukraine thing. And then there's Kazakhstan, and then there's stuff going on in the Middle East and all of this. But it's the idea of putting the weapons of warfare in the hands of somebody else who's outside the perimeter, which to me also speaks again of the call of Ezekiel. You know, if you don't tell them their sin and they die in their sin, it's on your head. You have not given them the weapons to war in their own life to combat the forces of evil, to repent, and then to live. But if you do give them the weapons of war and you say, here's how you repent and how you get right before God, and they don't use them, it's on them. They had everything they needed to defeat the enemy of evil in their life, and they haven't acted. So when your son, Ezekiel, and his dad, Marshall, there was a multi-generational teaching the hands to war thing. And what it did was it flew the whole warfare apparatus beyond the hedge. And the next thing we know is that there's been a very well-placed arrow that landed on the top of the head of this bear and split the bear in half. I think it has to do with something outside of your family, and family even representing the country. And, of course, the bear can represent Russia. It can represent a lot of things, but that's the first thing.
Well, California, I mean, it is that California is the bear also. And that's what's on our flag, is the brown bear. Yeah. And so I did think of Russia, California, and there was one other place that is associated with the bear. I'm trying to blank, but I wondered, okay, which place is this about? What is the bear?
Yeah, what I heard was the Russia connection. I'm kind of asking God about the state thing. The thing about the state thing is again, they're on a grassy knoll, and there's this hedge all around. There's a hedge of protection. So to me, that's like the Psalm 91: "No harm will befall you, no disaster will come near your tent." Yeah. You guys obviously live in California. It's your home territory. And now it could be outside the hedge of the perimeter that you guys live in as Christians and as being, protective servants of the Most High. But I felt like it was further outside than that. That's why, to me, it feels like something that is remote, like the Russia-Ukraine thing. I think it's interesting that the political plays that have happened where we've had one person get up and just kind of mumble and really say nothing, and then somebody else has to get up who was from California and try to say, oh no, we're going to have strong economic sanctions and blah, blah, blah. But coming from a vice president, like, it just, to me, it's like it has no teeth at all. Yeah. Putin doesn't really care what Kamala Harris thinks in any planet on any world. I just see him as completely disregarding everything that she would say. And I don't mean to disrespect the vice president to say that. I just mean that the administration really needs to get their stuff together if they want to play on the world stage, because right now we're pretending like there's competence in the White House and in the governance of this country, and they're flat. There just hasn't been what we need to have a strong show of force in the geopolitical global theater. Yeah. And that needs to change. And so, by what I feel like, I don't feel like it represents I don't feel like it represents the state of California. To me, it seems more international. But it'd be interesting, because if the bear represents the state of California and California splits, Like there's been a lot of talk about creating other states, you know, the state
Mhm.
of, and I know when I lived up in Reading, there was this whole big push to try to get, you know, north of basically the Bay Area or Sacramento and above to become its own state because they're so conservative, you know,
Yeah.
the farmers and ranchers and hunters and gun owners, and they do not believe any of the political garbage that is attributed with the cities of like San Francisco and LA, even though
Yeah.
San Francisco and LA, I don't believe are even predominantly progressive. I believe that's the lie, is the progressive, certain parties of the progressive left and certain members of society have decided to say, well, we need this and we need these rights and we need, and you think of the city of San Francisco. And if you look at even what percentage of the city of San Francisco is actually even like gay or homosexual or using that lifestyle, what percentage of that actually exists? And it's, you know, the numbers that I heard, it's like 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
The city of San Francisco. And of course they've painted that like the whole town is it's not. And like the whole entertainment industry is like, it's not. It's just a group of people have decided that they're going to be loud and proud and they're going to get out there with their philosophy. And it's everything that they said they wouldn't do. You know, everybody was like, there were people that were in the conservative movement that are like, well, we don't want to grant these rights, like the rights of spouses to, you know, inherent wealth. I just had a really good friend of mine that I've known for 30 plus years that I led to the Lord when we were in the Navy together, in Dubai. And he's a gay man and his husband just died. And, you know, I went out there to spend time with him because I love the guy and, absolutely love him. And, you know, dealing with, you know, the whole insurance thing and what does this look like and all of that. And, you know, it was, you know, I think if we come from a place of love, it's not really about laws that are trying to restrict or prevent. But one of the things that when the whole kind of gay agenda really came out really strong, there were a lot of mom and dads, myself included, conservative and Christian, that said, well, we don't want this forced on our children. And we always heard from the left, well, no, it's just about, you know, love is love, freedom, blah, blah, blah. We want to be able to do what we want to do. That clearly is not the case. They absolutely flat out lied to us. Now the battle is in the school board because of the pornography and the smut and the garbage that they're trying to push down the throats of 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds in school. It's stuff that, you know, we'd even blush reading, like we don't want to read this stuff, and they're trying to put it down the throats of our kids. So it's never been about freedom to express what we want to express. It's been about, we want to convert the next generation. And it's really interesting that in your dream, it's your husband working with your son on how to war on behalf. And it's literally a teaching of the next generation of how to fight the battles. And part of it is getting the weapons to the people outside the perimeter to be able to fight their own battles. You look at, you know, I think people need to realize that there's alternatives to whatever they choose. And if people feel like they're trapped in a lifestyle that, even though the world says this is a great lifestyle, if it's something that they want freedom from, that there is freedom. And, you know, it's not popular, and people are even trying to silence the voices of people that even want to talk about an alternative to an alternative lifestyle. But
it's really crazy, the attack on the First Amendment and trying to censor what we can and cannot say. And it's so concerning. I mean, I think with our founding fathers finding that to be the most important thing, and that it had to stay, we had to stay free in that area, or else it all begins to crumble. And boy, we see an attempt right now to cause it all to crumble.
And we let them. As soon as they took President Trump off of Twitter, we should have probably figuratively and literally burned that company to the ground. We should have said, this isn't going to happen in America. And now these social media companies, which are these technocrat hegemonies who've decided what the conversation is going to be, is not anything close to the free dialogue and expression of ideas that the founding fathers wanted. And they don't realize, or maybe they do realize, that they're treading on dangerous ground, because if this ever swings the other way, they're never going to have a voice again.
Yeah.
They're going to be so far buried, and they're never going to get to express their crazy, ridiculous, satanic ideologies ever again if this swings the other way. But I think there's actually good people who, again, it's not Republican or Democrat. That's not the war that we're in. It's good versus evil. And those that are trying to tyrannically silence the voices of people like medical doctors who have years and years and years of experience, and then they want to quote the science, but they won't let the guy that developed the test have a voice anymore.
Yeah.
I think we're in a dangerous time, but the problem is we've let this happen. The American people have put up with this, and we've turned the other way, and we've said, well, you know, it's okay, and it's this and it's that, and it's not okay. And when we wake up, and part of it is good people like you that are saying, I'm going to put my family and my life on hold, and I'm going to run for office because we need free and fair elections in the state of California.
Yeah.
And we need to change the governance and the policies of this state because we're losing it. And when that happens, that's when the tide begins to turn. But there's also a whole lot of people that may not feel called to run for office, but we need to absolutely get as loud as we possibly can.
Yes. The left is loud.
Possible. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
they make sure their voice is heard.
Should be afraid of their people. That's how the founding fathers set it up, that the government should fear people, and people like the governor and not the governor specifically, but people in charge of places like the state of California should live in fear of the general public that wants to live normal lives and not have this progressive, tyrannical garbage. We have to see your paper stuff put on them in places like San Francisco and LA.
Yeah.
So the second you get elected, what are you going to do? What does your first 100 days in office look like?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think assessing the damage and going through all of the systems and all of the, like, there are certain things that I know about the current Secretary of State that just need to immediately be reversed. One of which is she transitioned people out or shuffled them around, or they quit and she didn't replace them in the investigators department. So they used to have a whole team of people that would investigate when, you know, when there was a situation at a precinct, you know, they would call and say, oh, this just happened. And then one of the investigators would take care of it and look into it, do an investigation and bring it to justice, ideally. Well, the current Secretary of State got rid of all the investigators. And then there's only 3 left right now, total for the whole state of California, 3 investigators. And she put one of them on vacation on election day for the recall and had the other 2 working from home because of COVID. She said it was not safe for them to come into the office, and told them there was nothing to investigate. It had been a completely fraud-free election when I was interviewing people who were having all kinds of crazy stuff happen and having people vote in their name. And, you know, one precinct in Los Angeles County had 70% of the people who showed up to vote were told they'd already voted. 70%, not like 2%, you know, like gigantic issue that wasn't investigated because the Secretary of State decided to get rid of all the investigators. Well, that's convenient, right? If you want to still an election, let's just get rid of all the people who look into that stuff. So stuff like that just needs to be immediately reversed, and have, you know, hire good, godly people that are honest and care about what's fair and right. And also something that she did away with that I would immediately want to switch right back is she said that, so it's supposed to be that they do an audit of 1%, like a 1% sampling of each precinct, and they check that 1% to make sure it matches what the machine has said, right? Like the Dominion machines and all that. And 3 days before the recall election that just took place, she notified all the county registrars that they were not going to follow that rule, that it was too costly. When the 1% sampling isn't correct, it automatically, it was required to have an audit done on that precinct, on the whole vote. And so 3 days before the recall, she said, we're not going to do that. Well, there were a lot of 1% samplings that did not match. And no audits will be done because she just decided that that's not going to happen. So there's just a lot like that needs to be fixed, reversed, corrected, made right. And, you know, a lot of of the big important things have to go through the legislature. So I would definitely want to be advocating and trying to persuade the legislature for the things that are really important, the things that are the will of the people, like voter ID and stuff like that, common sense stuff like that, you know. So there's plenty that needs to be changed. But I have another dream that I want to tell you. Can I tell you another one?
Yeah, please.
Super short too.
Okay.
So a man, I was just standing like outside, and a man came up to me and he said that I should go over to the Rainbow Bread Company. And he said, it's over in Rainbow Circle. Then he said, there are 3 bread companies over there in Rainbow Circle. And as he said that, I could see Rainbow Circle in the dream. And it was this cul-de-sac that had 3 buildings.
That's it, huh? Wow. Well, the first thing I thought of when you said rainbow bread is I thought of 2 things. I thought of manna, and I thought of Noah, you know, the promise of God as far as being the rainbow, entering a new area. The evil is rid from the land. God has wiped the slate clean. It's a new start, you know, but when they land, they don't have food. They don't have, you know, they had what they packed on the boat, but they didn't have anything that they could go, oh, we got crops here waiting for us. We can, you know, there had to be a time of planting and growing and and all of that in order for them to eat. And so I don't know if that the Bible addresses that, but to me, it's akin to, I bet, I would believe that God had to supernaturally provide food for them once they landed and they were on the ground again in order for them to be able to grow food and be able to sustain themselves. But I think it's, you know, it reminds me of the manna in the desert, you know, supernatural provision during a time of promise and a new beginning is what I see.
So why do you think it was so specific that there were 3? There's 3 bread companies in Rainbow Circle.
And they said you needed to go to a specific one though, right?
They said to go to the Rainbow Bread Company. It's in Rainbow Circle, and there are 3 bread companies there.
So there's 3 bread companies, but there's only one rainbow bread company.
Yeah.
In the Rainbow Circle. Yeah. So I think it has to do with what it is we're eating, what it is we're feeding ourselves. Are we feeding ourselves on the promises of God, or are we feeding ourselves the bread of, you know, what other, you know, rainbow, especially in this day and age, has another meaning, particularly in places like the state of California.
Well, and that's the second dream that I've had that had something about a rainbow. The other dream was that I was standing in this room and it was like full of bright light and there were a few other people there, and all of a sudden there was an earthquake and the room shook and gold started falling from the ceiling. Like the earthquake shook the gold loose, and I was completely coated in gold from top to bottom. And someone looked at me and said, whoa, look at you. You're covered in gold and you have a rainbow in one pocket and shine in the other.
Wow, that's really cool.
Isn't that interesting?
That reminds me of it's like the lyrics to a song or something. You know, a rainbow in one pocket and shine in the other. Wow.
I think about that dream all the time.
Yeah. Well, shine reminds me of, and this is just, you know, what comes to my spirit is the Shekinah glory. Shine.
That's what came to me too. That was the first thing, is the glory of God. Right.
But the heavy, weighty, gold-like presence, gold-laden presence of God is actually the kabod. So the kabod is what's manifested on you, which is this gold that has dropped on you, that has become a layer, and your whole being is covered with this gold. It's the idea of an anointing and a mantle that's been placed on you, which is interesting because, and I've done some study on the word kabod because God brought it up in certain times of my life. There's one place in the Bible that it occurs in the feminine, and that's Psalm 45. 45. That's interesting. But it's also...
I'm also 45 years old.
Oh, well, there you go. Psalm 45 is the wedding song of the king to the foreign princess. And it says, all beautiful is the bride in her chamber. her garment is interladen with gold. And it's at that place that the actual root word is kabod, which is the heavy, weighty, gold-like presence of God. And it's in that place where she's about to take a position of rulership and leadership in the land. I know a lot of us look at a marriage as like, oh, it's the bride, and oh, it's this. And oh. She's marrying a king. So it's not just that she's a bride. It's that she's now becoming queen. She's in a place of leadership and governance in a land that wasn't hers. And in the midst of that, this mantle of gold is placed upon her, which I think is fascinating, because I think that relates to you in the dream.
Well, and California is also called the Golden State.
Absolutely. I've had open visions out there when I was at the prayer house at Bethel of a mountain full of dirt, and the shaking started happening and all the dirt fell away. And it was this mountain just entirely of gold. And again, I think it has to do with once the, I think the exodus of California is intentional. And I think it's because certain people want to come in and buy up all the real estate and own all the stuff. And I think it's imminent that the state of California is going to switch red. And again, it's not about political party or ideology, but what God wants is he wants the right people in place that will utilize and harvest the natural resources and the wealth that he's placed in that place. And I think what the dream is showing is you have that anointing. So it's the kabod that's falling on you, which is a mantle of gold, of wealth, of governance, related to Psalm 45 of being in a governmental position, a mantle of a queen. You have the Shekinah glory in your pocket, which means it's hidden and yet to be exposed. And in the other pocket is the rainbow, which I believe is the promises of God over the state of California. So I believe what God is saying is you could very well be the person that you're mantled to be, the person that can unlock both the glory of the state of California and the promises of God to the state of California. And God's placed that mantle on you.
Wow. Oh, it's interesting that you say unlock, because I just moved, and when we were moving, like on moving day, I'm walking through the garage, taking stuff in, and I see a key on the ground, like just right in the middle of the garage. And I'm like, hey, is this anyone's key? And I pick it up and show it to everybody. No, none of the movers. It wasn't their key. There are no one in the family. Okay. So I stick it in my pocket, keep going. About an hour later, there is another key in the exact same spot where I had picked up the other key. A completely different kind of key. And I thought, that is so weird. And it's like exactly where the other key was. So I just pick it up, ask if it's anyone's key. They're like, you found another key? I'm like, yeah, I did. I found another key right in here. And everyone's like, no, it's not mine. I'm like, okay, that's so weird. Put it away. Find another key. 3 keys, all in the exact same spot in the garage floor within like approximately an hour of one another.
Wow.
And they did not belong to anyone that day. And they weren't all there at the same time. I mean, just really very interesting. And I was like, oh, okay, Lord.
I was like, maybe they're the keys to the 3 bread companies on Rainbow Circle.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating. I think that's what I love about people like you, like me, that just have the opportunity to live a supernatural life. Like people just, I know you've written 1 book, but I know you're going to write more, but man, people just, it's like, you can't make this stuff up. People can't even believe this stuff that's going to happen. And I feel like your story, though, it's an incredible, people go get Rachel's book. If you haven't read Rachel's book, she has just an amazing testimony of, and it doesn't even include where you're at now and what you're going into. And I feel like your life, in a sense, is just beginning. Like you're coming into identity and destiny of everything that you've been through, and the attack that's been against you in your life, which has been hellacious, is about to be fulfilled of the promises of God, the purpose and the destiny. And that's what I believe the dream about Rainbow Circle is. The Rainbow Circle is, first of all, the circle represents full circle. It represents the promises of God that you've heard about and you've contended for and you've believed, and, hope deferred makes the heart sick, right? It's been years and years and years. There's some things that you've been trusting and believing God for that haven't come to pass yet. Mm-hmm. And it's coming full circle, but choosing to eat the bread of the Rainbow Bread Company is the bread of promise. It's not the bread of perversion that people want to say it is. It's not the rainbow flag. It's the promises of God. And there's been words about God reclaiming the rainbow in this season. And he will, because the rainbow means the promises of God. And when God chooses to use figurative language in a dream, he uses it from his perspective, not necessarily mainstream media's perverted perspective on what the rainbow is. And so what I believe is what he's saying is there's things that are going to come full circle, but you have a choice of what bread you eat. You can eat from the Rainbow Bread Company on Rainbow Circle, or there's other bread companies that you can eat from as well. And it's not that they're necessarily horrible or bad or anything, but it's the bread of promise. Will you eat the bread of promise? And the bread of promise for the Israelites during the 40 years in the desert was manna. It was the bread that was available every day. And the promise of God was that I will take care of you and it will be available every day. But then when they cross the Jordan and they go into the promised land, it's a completely different menu. It's the massive grapes. It's the fruit of the land. It's the land of milk and honey. It's the goodness of the land. And I feel like your journey there's about to be a crossing over. And what's sustained you in the season of getting to the point where you are, when you go into the land, now the land is also a land of giants. It's some of the strongest warfare they ever went through, bar none, is when they crossed over into the land. But the two spies were the spies that ate the bread of promise, that came back, Joshua and Caleb, and said, we can take these guys, we'll eat these guys for breakfast. They'll be like bread to us, is what they said. That's actually the quote. They'll be as bread to us. We'll eat these guys for breakfast, And then it was the other 10 that came back and said, we see ourselves as grasshoppers in their eyes, and they're so big and they're so this and they're so that. Those are the ones that died in the desert. And so there's crossing over, and the crossing over is the promise of the wealth of the land, which is what we're talking about in the state of California, the gold that's there, the potential that's there, the tech stuff that's there. There's so much promise that God's put in the state of California that because of policies and evil and corruption, they've put a cap on the limits, I believe, of things like innovation and natural resources that are not being tapped in the state of California because of greed and corruption, and because God doesn't want that to fall into the hands of the wicked. Because one of the purposes of the wicked is to make money to store up for the righteous. So if they're putting in weird policies in place and you can't do this and you can't do that and you have to have this energy and blah, 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 what they're doing is they're capping the wells. That's what they do in places like Texas, is they go and they dig and they get a well and then they cap it because it's not right to sell the oil because of the market fluctuations. And so they try to control the markets, and they do the same thing with gold. They do the same thing with the diamond market. What they're doing is they're holding on to these natural resources, thinking they're going to stay in their hands forever and thinking they're going to control the wealth. And what they're really doing is they're capturing the wealth and they're storing it up so the righteous can come in and get it. And that's the promise of God, is the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. Do you know how much wealth is in the state of California? They could ridiculously and easily solve all of the problems, homelessness. And if you're one of the people that eats the bread of promise, you're going to see that promise come full circle. And God has not forgotten the words that he spoke over the state of California. And I lived there. There was a time that I was looking up every prophetic word related to the city of Redding.
There's a lot.
There's a lot.
When we just moved into this house, there's a fig tree in our neighbor's yard, and its branches hang over into our yard and drops figs. And the Lord said, I'm showing you something. And it was kind of like that. You will eat from trees that you did not plant, and have houses you did not build, and we drink from wells you did not dig. And it was all that stuff. And the other thing he spoke to me about this week was about the spies. And it was really interesting. It was a correction because I was feeling hopeless about how, like, it feels so daunting, especially when you feel like the elections are stolen. It's like, how does anyone good even ever get into office? How do we turn this around if we can't even have an honest vote? And so I was just feeling heavy. And the Lord just said, you'd always told me you would be one of the two spies. And it was just kind of like, that's all I said. And I was like, oh, Lord, wow. Sorry.
What a promise.
Sorry. I am I do want to be one of the two spies. I do not want to be that. I've always hated that the other 10 were that way. And didn't you, like, you read that story and I would just get mad. I think, oh,
yeah,
so lame. You don't even believe God. Like, just believe God, and I would just feel so
cool, right?
Yeah. And then here I was being like one of them. I mean, I turned it around though immediately. I was like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Lord, you can do anything. And just kind of shifted back into being full of faith that you can do the impossible. It could very well be impossible right now with California, but we're not apart from God. God does the impossible. So I don't know exactly what his plan is, but it's something,
it's something big.
Mm-hmm. I believe that it is really something big. I don't think that he would have made me stay in the state and fight for it if it were actually hopeless and he wasn't intending to do anything good here. I do think that something amazing is going to come out of the state of California.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's going to be incredible. I think, I remember a prophetic moment that I had when I first had moved out to Redding, and I looked up, I was studying city transformation, and I went out there to meet with people, to meet with leaders about city transformation. That's why I ended up in Redding. I went out for a weekend and stayed for 2 years, and I didn't even go home. Like, I literally 6 months later called some friends and said, can you pack up everything I own in life? And I had lived in this high-rise apartment for 12 years. Pack up everything I've owned in my place I've lived for 12 years and ship it out. I'm not even coming home to move.
Wow.
And then I went back. So I moved out in June, and then I went back the following February and got my car, and I drove my car out, and I'm sitting in the house of prayer because God had put me in a season of rest where for months, Rachel, all I did was go to the house of prayer and lay on the floor. And it was one of those places that I really learned how to hear the voice of God, because I just shut up. I was type A and driven, and I got to prove myself and do this in business, and I got to be the man with the answers. And I just got so unimpressed with my ability in that season, where it's like, God, I just want to hear what your plans are, what your thoughts are. And he reminded of a prophetic interpretation that I had done for a church in Ohio about the 20 years of prophecy. I put it into it. I didn't even know what a prophetic interpretation was. They handed me 20 years of prophecy the second time I visited this church. And I had prayed, God, if you want me to go to this church, I want to know the prophetic destiny. The pastor's wife, lovely lady, walked up and handed me all the prophecies for 20 years. And I had said a word to her. I just prayed, God, I want to know the prophetic destiny of this house if I'm called here. And it so wrecked me that I took like the next 2 days off work. I went to the office and I just read every one of the, Graham Cook and, Todd Bentley and all of these major, Kim Clement, all of these words of over 20 years of words. Mm-hmm. And so I highlighted them. I bulletized them. I put them in the right order based on what I was studying, because a lot of it was economic. And then I wrote a narrative based on because each step I'm like, God, what do I do now? We'll do this. We'll do this. We'll do this. And then I gave it back to them and I said, here's the narrative of how all these prophecies will play out. Here's the order they have to happen. Here's the theology behind what the word says. And it was like all of these random prophecies over 20 years. And so I'm laying on the prayer house floor in February, and God reminds me of that. And I went out there to be part of a city transformation movement. And so I started focusing on the city of Redding, and I'm like, do you want me to do like a prophetic interpretation for a whole city? And so I thought, what if we started putting all the prophecies for a city or a region together? And God just reminded me that that event with that church happened 7 years prior. I haven't thought about it in years, and God just brought it to my mind. I'm like, okay, I'm here now, God. What do I do? And I remember this incident in this church 7 years ago. And I'm like, huh, and God says, go to the resource table. And they had a table with just a bunch of Bibles and stuff on it. And so I walked over there, and right in the center of the table was a folder, and it said 2007 prophecies. Well, this was 2014. It was exactly 7 years later. And I opened the book, and the first prophecy I see is Kim Clement prophesying over the state of California.
Yeah.
And then God says, where is he prophesying from? And I looked, and he's prophesying from Toledo, Ohio, from that church that I did the prophetic interpretation for.
Wow.
And I'm like, no way. And then I realized I was there in that meeting that day. And I'm like, wow, this sounds fun. And here I am now, 7 years later in California. And here's this prophecy over the whole state of California. And I turned the page, and there was a word by another prophet that God is going to accelerate things that would normally take 20 years, he's going to have done in 7. And I looked at it again, and it said 2007 prophecies, and this was exactly 7 years later. There's been so many words over the state of California, and I feel like that may even be a mandate for you or your staff, is to collect those words. That's eating the bread of promise. You begin to collect what God has said over the state of California and begin to declare the promises of God over the state of California, despite the mass exodus from California, despite the tyrannical medical laws, despite the homelessness and all of the problems. Everybody sees that. But if you become the voice, the Secretary of State, and here's what I'm hearing, is you're the secretary declaring, meaning the person in charge, the pen of a ready writer, declaring the voice of God. By the way, Psalm 45 starts out with, my tongue will be the pen of a ready writer. That's the start of Psalm 45, which talks about the kabod glory and the woman becoming a queen. So the secretary, you're the one taking the written word and declaring the word of God over the state of California, and you're changing the state of things because of what you write and what you declare. So I feel like as you continue in your campaign, collect all of the words, as many as you can, of the state of California, and begin to declare the promises of God over the state of California. And I feel like it's going to resonate with the DNA of the people that live there, who have a heart and a love for the land. And I feel like it's going to be a windfall. I feel like God is going to turn things around massively in the state, because not only are you eating the bread of promise, but you're feeding the bread of promise to other people. And you're living in that place, that cul-de-sac, that place of safety, which also goes back to the dream with your husband and your son. What you're doing is shooting weapons outside the perimeter, and you're giving people who are in a tough spot the way to be able to fight and war for themselves. You can begin to teach people, whether they're Christians or not, whether they believe like you politically or not, how to believe and contend and fight for a better state of things in the state of California.
Wow. Wow. So good. That's so encouraging, John. And some of those prophecies have already been sent to me, because people have said, hey, I don't know if you've seen this prophecy about California, but I think it's about you. And they've sent it to me. And I've even gotten the same one sent to me by different people saying, we think this is about you. And some of them are Kim Clement things. There's one where he talks about a revolution starting in the state of California. And God had told me, you're running for Secretary of State, but what you're really doing is beginning a spiritual revolution in the state of California. And so then I think I had said that on one of my shows. And so someone sent me, actually, I think Kim Clement's daughter sent that one to me about the revolution beginning in the state of California. And specifically that something was going to happen amongst the Hispanic population, which was very interesting, because I am really focused on the Hispanic population for my campaign. Because they're overlooked. They live like conservatives, but they vote like liberals, because the liberals have lied to them and acted like they're the ones that care about them, when the exact opposite is true. And And something's happening right now amongst the Hispanics where like a poll was done about, it was done by race. I don't know why they do that kind of stuff, but how do blacks feel about Joe Biden? How do whites feel about Joe Biden? How do the Hispanics feel about Joe Biden? And by far Hispanics, only 22% of Hispanics trust Joe Biden and think he's doing a good job. Both parties combined. It wasn't just one party that was polled. 22%. So there's a real awakening happening in the Hispanic community. And so that was part of the prophecy from Kim. And then the other one was the one you've probably already heard, that we've all heard about, a woman who arises during the middle of the presidency of what we think is Donald Trump, based on, that prophecy. And then it said that the cartels are afraid of her.
Really?
Have you heard that prophecy?
I have not.
Okay. Well, it's fascinating because
hear this.
That's the one that people started sending to me. They said, Rachel, this is you. This prophecy is about you. But I was like, the cartels are afraid of her. Kind of weird, right? Well, I'm part of a Secretary of State coalition where I meet every Friday with the Secretary of State candidates from all over the country. And we have advisors that help us, and we encourage each other and help each other and share information. And it's fantastic. Well, one of the people that helps us, I don't want to say what it was that he did because I don't want to give away his identity, but he did something very significant and was a whistleblower and undercover. And part of what he did was, it was connected to the cartels. And so we're at a Friday meeting, and he said, I got a very interesting phone call this week from he said the name of the guy. He's the leader of the largest Mexican cartel. And he called and said, why is your group talking about election integrity? Stop talking about election integrity. And he said, it's interesting. Who would have thought the Secretary of State candidates would be making the cartels afraid? And when he said that, I'm like, that prophecy. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Like I could not, I never get to a place where that kind of stuff doesn't amaze me. Like a word that Kim Clement spoke, I think it was in like 2007 also. I think it was like 2007, 2008, something like that. And then here, all these years later, people sending it to me, we think you are the fulfillment of this prophecy. And then me having kind of that one piece that didn't make sense. I thought, why would the cartels be afraid of me though? And I am like a very intense, like focused person. And I think it's wise for someone like them to not want to mess with me. Right. Because I will use my spiritual authority and I know who I am. And so I understand on that level, someone who's evil being afraid of someone like me who knows how to use their spiritual authority and all that. So that's kind of how I was reasoning it. But then when he got that call, it was like, wow, they have a really vested interest in us having dishonest elections. And they are afraid of an honest Secretary of State. Isn't that interesting?
That's crazy. Yeah, that tells you the side of people who don't want to investigate. And again, it's not that, I love how they want to say, well, the theory of election fraud has been debunked. Nothing's been debunked because nobody will even look at the proof or the information. Yeah. They want to sweep it under the rug and not investigate. If they cared about this country or the state, or if they cared about election integrity or the state of the United States of America or our founding fathers or integrity at all, if they had one iota of integrity, they would at least investigate and look and see, is there anything that's happening? And they've just absolutely stonewalled anybody that's tried to bring any evidence forward and just say it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. And the funny thing is they have zero credibility at all. The people that are doing that, they have no credibility, and they think that people don't see, and they think that America is just a bunch of sheeple that believe everything that's put out on the news, on mainstream media. And people are, again, looking at the Joe Rogan thing, people are waking up and they don't care about the censorship and the lies. They're going to find out the answers. And when this whole thing turns around, the enemy has so overplayed its hand.
Yes. Oh, that's something that I have heard so many times recently, is the enemy is overplaying his hand. The enemy is overplaying his hand. I just keep, and it's almost like good. Keep overplaying your hand because it will turn on you. And there is an awakening happening. There's like Joe Rogan is such a great example because he is liberal, generally leaning, but he loves truth. He loves the truth. I really believe that about him. He pursues truth. I think that's why everyone likes him. Like, you can tell he really wants to understand what is what, and he wants to know the truth. And so I've loved how he's kind of taken this shift to the right as he has realized that that's where the truth is leading him. And it's just so encouraging. I love it.
Wow. That's incredible. I love the fact that you're looking into the prophecies. I love what Kim Clement's daughter has done, where they have the searchable database. You can look up like the word California and get every word, both video and written, that he's ever said on, California.
In fact, you were going to do something like that too, right? Like create a...
Yeah, we're doing it. One of the things that we're doing with spiritual intelligence is we're centralizing what we call raw spiritual intelligence. And so we're finding people like yourself that are just known dreamers. And we're saying, can you send us everything that you have? Because when people say, well, hey, I had a dream about keys. We got 15 dreams about keys. I had a dream about the Liberty Bell. Do you know the prophetic word that this guy said about the Liberty Bell, or the dream this guy had, or this word over here? And then what we do is we put it in a dossier, a topical dossier, and we have the dreams and the prophetic words. And then we go do the history. This is when the Liberty Bell was first rung. This is Leviticus 10:25, which is the inscription on the Liberty Bell. Because the approach that we take is, if God wants to talk about something, it's worth our time to understand. I've spent probably 60 or 100 hours studying Abraham Lincoln because he showed up as a symbol in 2 or 3 key dreams. And so I've leaned into, that's why I'm reading these books on presidents and on understanding like World War II and understanding the intelligence agencies that George Washington had and Abraham Lincoln had during the Civil War, because God has given us all kinds of dreams related to the idea of what he calls a righteous intelligence service in our land. And it's an intelligence service that is above defilement and isn't part of the occultic history and the experiment stuff and all of the garbage that some of probably well-meaning people have done in the name of intelligence in the United States. And God wants something that he can speak to. And we call it intelligence by other means. As you know, when you get a download from heaven in a dream or in a word from God, you can't hack it. It's better information than they have. And based on a world that is all on deception and lies and sleight of hand, and that's a lot of what happens in the intelligence world, this is just far superior. It's a higher frequency, and it's far superior to kind of the old tradecraft. And so what we want to do is we want to begin to bring first the dreams and the dreamers and follow people that are dreaming. And a lot of times they're not the main prophetic voices. The main prophetic voices have dreamer friends that are handing them dreams, but the really cool dreams are coming from a lot of these hidden ones. And so our goal, and one of the things that we're doing, is we're building connections with these people. And we're saying, if you send your information to us, first of all, we want to catalog it and keep track of it. But we also want to use the information as it relates to other things that God is showing us. And by the way, we have a track to whether it's government entities or people in positions of power that can use this information for the good of all of America or whatever it is. They can use actionable intelligence and put it into play in the real world. It's not just, wow, that's a neat dream. It's like, no, this is somebody that can act on what's being said.
So cool. That is such a great idea. I love it.
Yeah, we're super excited. We have about 40 who spent about 9 months. We have about 40 trained, I would call them government level analysts. And these are people that know how to put together, they know how to do dream interpretation like Joseph did in the Bible. That's the model we went after. They know how to write dream reports that are based on the president's daily brief. They know how to work in teams. They know how to put together dossiers. They know how to brief dossiers. Like a lot of people have like a call in their life. You're called to stand before kings. Well, who's teaching people how to stand before kings? We are. We're teaching people how to hear God like Joseph and Daniel did, how to present that information, how to operate diplomatically in the presence of authority, how to approach a king and bring a gift, how to honor the people who didn't have the answer. Like there's a fascinating study in Daniel, in Daniel 2, about Daniel didn't just get the answer and run to the king and say, I have the answer. The first thing that he did is he brought credibility to the captain of the king's guard, who stopped doing what he was ordered to do, which was kill all the wise men, in order to bring Daniel in. And Daniel said, take me to the king. The first time he went to the king, he went by himself. The second time he said, take me to the king. And so the captain of the king's guard got to go in and say, I have found, you didn't find anything, buddy, but he said, I have found a guy with the answer. And then the next thing Daniel does is he looks at the wise men and he said, everything they told you was true. There's been no king, no matter how great or mighty, that's ever asked such a thing, that his wise men would tell them the dream first and then tell them the interpretation. So everything they said was true. And by the way, they were also true that there's no wise men that can do this, that these answers lie with God. But then he said, but God wants you to know the interpretation of the dream and the interpretation. And so he's told me, and then he told him. And of course, the next play is the king bows down before him and he makes him head of all the wise men. Well, the first thing he did was he restored their credibility in the eyes of the king before he gave the king the answer. You know, so it's like, it's things like this that, you know, we don't just show up one day and we're in a position. There's a lot of people that want to advise the president or stand before kings. It's like, but what training do you have? What do you even know biblically? Like how, if God's put a call on your life, who is giving you, you know, the bread, the sustenance that you need in your life to be in these positions? And so that's one of the things that we're doing. We're training people like the CIA trains its analysts, and we're using some of the same books, but we're also teaching them how to hear God and how to hear God at a level that when they stand before people and people of authority, they can give the answers.
So good. And, you know, training is really lacking, I feel like, in the body of Christ, like that discipleship and training up in gifts. I know it happens like in certain places, like Bethel really is a great place for training, you know, but I just feel like in general, that's a weak spot for the body of Christ is discipleship, training. You know, you have a gift, great, but you need maturity, you need training, you need to learn how, you know, what not to do, what to do. Like it took me a long time to learn things. I had to learn the hard way because it was so hard to like find a mentor who well, first of all, I grew up in a church that didn't believe in the supernatural. So then I'm having like this prophetic stuff happening all the time in my life and trying to sort it out. And also one of the main things I think that was hard and that I had to learn the hard way is when to not share it. When to not share what you're hearing, because, you know, a lot of stuff that God shows you, you're not supposed to say. And that was hard. I had to learn by trial and error, you know, but I think that training is so important. It could help us to just be people of excellence and use our gifts excellently, you know, in a way that is so glorifying to God and amazes people too, right? Like that draws people to the Lord. When you interpret a dream, I truly think that it's almost like an evangelist tool. The people are drawn to the Lord as they watch you do that. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's amazing. I you know, my heart is to see governments run that way, where the first thing they do is instead of, well, let's look at all the data. Let's look at the data too, but let's ask God.
Hey, with my campaign right now, that's what I'm doing. I have found that the political consultant stuff is kind of a scam. Like, I mean, there's just not really, it's hard to find a good one. Mm-hmm. And the Holy Spirit said, I will be your campaign consultant. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. So I don't have a consultant. I am praying. That's why I'm reaching out to the Hispanic community. That's what God told me to do. Mm-hmm. It's almost half the vote in California at this point. I mean, in my county, it's 58% of the county is Hispanic. Mm-hmm. It's huge. The population is exploding. So Holy Spirit told me to focus on the Hispanic community and that a lot of them are going to vote for me because I genuinely will care and bring the heart of the Father to them, and they'll know that and they'll see that and they'll feel that. And that it will even expose lies that they have believed about the Democratic Party being the party that cares about them. So it's amazing.
Wow. That's incredible. I love it. Gosh, we could talk for days.
Yeah,
love the work that you're doing, and we need to talk more. And if there's anything that me or my group can do for you, we'd love to be able. I want to put you in touch with our friend from Virginia that I was telling you about.
Yes, that'd be great.
Because he had even some of the stuff that you were talking about the 70%. They found a way around that. Like there's things that they set in place that can't be hacked. And that's what I love is God will give you solutions and information that the enemy has no weapon that can take down the solution. That got literally no weapon formed against you will prosper. I love that. But when you think of like a strategic and tactical situation, like a campaign, because a campaign is warfare. Like you're literally fighting for the heart and soul of the state of California. And now more than ever, do we need to have honor and integrity and right policy and sound judgment and good advisors who are eating the bread of promise of what God has declared over the circle that you live in, the rainbow circle, over the state of California. And that it's not a perverted promise. It's not a this promise. It's not a rainbow flag promise. It's a promise of what God has said and the destiny that God has declared over California and over her people. And I just love, you're such a brave and fierce, godly woman. And I just love who you are. I love that you listen to the Lord. I love that your kids do, that your husband does. I love the fight that you guys are fighting in California. And we're just behind you 100%.
Thank you so much, John. I feel the same way about you. I love who you are. I love your heart. I love your gifting. I think it's very intriguing. Your gifting is very intriguing to me. I love it. And maybe that's because I'm such a dreamer. So the fact that you really focus on dreams too, I just think we're kindred spirits. So I appreciate it. And if you have any prophecies about California, forward them to me. If there's any that you still, retained from that time, or if you know of where I can access them, let me know. Cause I think that's a great idea to use those to war. Yeah,
I definitely have some things that I'll get to you. Absolutely.
Now you have my email address. So
yes, I do. Well, it's so great. It's so great to spend time with you today, Rachel. And like I said, we'll have to do it again soon, but you've been so generous. I know you're super busy, but thank you for taking the time to be with us today and just to hear just the encouraging things that God is doing in your life and your ministry, your ministry of what you're doing, not only what you do in who you are as a mom and what you do and all the people that you influence, but what you're aspiring to and the identity and the destiny that God's called you to, which is so much greater than a lot of us can even fathom. Running a state like the state of California is just a huge undertaking. But we know that God is with you, and we know that for such a time as this, he's raising up people like you and yourself to be in a position that the enemy and the forces of darkness are going to shudder when you win. So I'm excited. It's a new day in California.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the encouragement and affirmation for the state. It helps me be one of the two spies when I hear that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. Thanks again. Wow. Rachel Hamm, what an incredible story. Just what an incredible person that she is. And I just love who she is and what God's done in her life. So thank you for joining us. We love to have conversations like this where we don't just do one dream, but we get to see a window into somebody's life who lives a prophetic lifestyle, who lives a dream lifestyle, who understands that God speaks supernaturally and how it guides their journey. And we've certainly seen that today. So thank you for your time, and we hope you join us again soon.